Speaker.
Grant Robertson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Well, it's certainly true that if you go looking in the budget and the supplementary estimates and the Imprest supply bill, you aren't going to find anything that gives a vision or a picture of what the government's going to do. So the Minister of Finance is definitely right on that score. Before I come to some of the specific issues in the supplementary estimates, it is interesting that the Minister of Finance chose to use this speech to talk at some length about the government's so-called social investment approach. And there's one left, was that? No, happy to engage on it, Mr Bishop. In fact, more engagement on it would be better. And at its heart, its core, some of the rhetoric of the social investment approach, who could disagree with? The idea that we need early intervention, that we need to get into problems before they start, invest in people and the lives that they live to make sure that they can achieve their potential and don't end up in a situation where they aren't achieving what they want, where they're not contributing to society or to the economy in the way that they're capable of, and society misses out, and they miss out as well. So we all agree on that. And so Mr English says that's what we want to do, and we're going to do that by using big data, and we're going to use that by looking at our programs and measuring them properly, and we'll be able to see what the results are. Well, I don't think he should start talking about recidivism too quickly as an example of that, because that isn't going too well. But let's pick off one where the government actually has set a target and they think they've achieved it. And that's the pass rate for level 2 of NCEA. 85%. That's the target, or 85% of school leavers having the pass rate of level 2 for NCEA. And they're going to be able to point at statistics to say they're nearly there, or they are there. But, Mr Speaker, there's a fundamental problem with this, which is the fundamental problem with this approach that the Minister is putting forward. Getting NCEA level 2 is like going to the supermarket and you've got to fill up your trolley. And you have to fill up your trolley, and when it's full, you'll have NCEA level 2. Now, you can go around the supermarket and you can fill up your trolley completely with toothbrushes. So it's totally full. And you've filled your trolley, you've got NCEA level 2. But when you get home, you can't bake a cake. That's the problem with the government's public sector targets. It's all very well to say everyone's going to get level 2 of NCEA, but if that's just reaching that target and not worrying about the quality of it, not worrying about what people are actually learning, just making it to the target, then that's not good public service spending. And what we know in terms of NCEA level 2, just to take that as the example, is that yes, they're getting those level of pass rates, but then the Tertiary Education Commission has a report that says that school leavers, many of them are functionally illiterate and enumerate. That's what's the result of focusing so much on this target rather than the quality of what's been achieved. And then, Mr Speaker, the other problem with the social investment approach is it's all very well to track the results, to see if what's happening is working or not. But what's the answer? What's the answer? Has this got anything to do with what policies will actually work? No, because the government's not interested in listening to the community about what those policies are. It thinks it knows best. It thinks it knows who this support from the government should go to, and it simply sets itself up as the arbiter of what's good and what's not, and what works and what doesn't. Mr Speaker, it's words, it's rhetoric, it's artificial targets, it's not real policy development, and unfortunately for the Minister of Finance, while there might be some great principles behind it, the actual social investment approach itself is all smoke and mirrors. It's a mirage, not unlike the government's budget. But, Mr Speaker, returning to the question of supplementary estimates that we are debating today, as the Minister of Finance indicated, this is a regular part of the budget process, and one which all governments go through as they tidy up the accounts from the financial year as it's about to end. So what sort of scorecard can we give the government as it ends its financial year needing to make one or two extra payments? Well, one of the things we can look at, Mr Speaker, is what this year's budget told us is, and I'll quote here, what matters for achieving higher material living standards, and that's per capita GDP, Mr Speaker. Well, no, we'll just be working in unison here. Come up with something new, Dr. Clark. But what we know from the latest figures is that gross national income per person was zero. In the term that we're talking about these supplementary estimates for today, gross national income per person was zero, flat. GDP per capita just inches above that to 0.05. So we've seen the economy grow, and Mr English talked about that in his speech. We've seen the economy grow. GDP's growing up around 2.5% to 3%. Fantastic stuff. Good work. Guess what, Mr Speaker? There's a whole lot more people in New Zealand. There's a whole lot more people in New Zealand. And while it might look like the economy is growing, per person it's not. Which is why, Mr Speaker, when we're out talking to New Zealanders and they hear these numbers about growth in the economy, they think, why am I not experiencing that? Why is my community not experiencing that? If we go to my colleague Mika Whaitari's electorate up in Gisborne, and they say, you go up there and they say, there's no jobs here. 10% unemployment up in Gisborne. Confidence, the employment confidence survey came out the other day. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay region had come down, and with due respect to both my colleagues from that area, it's actually driven out of the Gisborne area. So people in that community aren't saying, fantastic, we've got growth. They're the people who know they're experiencing the flat per person growth. We're not going anywhere, Mr Speaker, and realistically for the government as they look ahead in the next 2 financial years, this continues. It continues because the population grows, but nothing's actually happening in terms of the government's policy agenda to match that in terms of what we're doing in the country. So what we see, and this was highlighted by the Westpac economists when they were reviewing this year's budget, is that they said none of the growth forecasts out into the future come as a result of a policy change or an action of the government. They're just projections. They're just projections about the fact that more people are going to show up. They're not actually about establishing a sustainable economy, one that grows decent jobs, one that provides reasons for New Zealanders both to stay here and come back from overseas. So we've got that on that scorecard, the government's struggling. On the other part of the score, 2 other parts of the scorecard for this financial year that these estimates come from where they're struggling is around unemployment. Grand promises made, Mr Speaker, at the election in 2014 of unemployment coming down towards 4%. Actually, it's not. It's up over 5. It's forecast to go up a little bit more. It's 144,000 real people without work, people who want to work, people who could be contributing to New Zealand in that meaningful way who aren't. So they failed on that part of the scorecard for the 2015-16 year. They also made big promises about the lift in wages, the amount that wages would grow up. Well, wages haven't grown in that way. 46% of New Zealanders didn't experience a wage increase in the year that we're covering under these estimates. And the share of wealth that working people have has declined over the year. It's declined over a succession of years. It means that people are working harder, but they're not seeing the return on that. And today, Mr Speaker, did that not hit home, with Statistics New Zealand releasing the latest wealth data that says the top 10% of New Zealand earners have 60% of the wealth. It's getting worse. It was about 55 or slightly under that when National took office, Mr Speaker, and now it's gone up to 60%. The bottom 40% hold 3% of the wealth. I'm proud, Mr Speaker, that when Labor was last in government, we stopped inequality growing and we started to reduce it through programs like Working for Families, interest-free student loans, 20 hours free early childhood education, good things that were building blocks. You kept every one of them. You kept every single one of them. This is the Minister of Finance who likes to criticise the last Labor government. He didn't ditch a single one of those promises. He's ridden off the back of Michael Cullen's success as a Minister of Finance, and now the chickens are coming home to roost. Now there's no Christchurch rebuild to rely on, Bill. It's all about population growth, and none of it is about a government that actually has a plan for a sustainable economy, Mr Speaker. Inequality is growing under this government. Fairness is going out the window. The Kiwi concept of a fair go, that wherever you were born, you could get ahead and you could succeed, has gone under this government. Inequality grows because this government is on the side of the very, very few at the top, not most New Zealanders who are working hard, Mr Speaker. The supplementary estimates here do nothing to change this side of the House's view on what the priorities of this government should be. Not a single reference in them to additional initiatives for housing, not a single reference in them for how they're really going to lift productivity, and all it is a record of their failure to work things out in Christchurch and the massive gaps in our health expenditure. That's actually what the estimate's about. Mr Speaker, this is another representation of a failed government who works only for the very few at the top and not most New Zealanders.
I call order.